Welcome to The Beat. I'm Jason Johnson in for Ari Melber. We start with more legal heat on Donald Trump. Shocker. The January 6th committee saying more witnesses have come forward since the bombshell testimony exposing Trump for fueling the violent coup. More on this in a moment. A rattled Trump will now have his allegiance tested from some of his closest allies. Breaking today, Rudy Giuliani and Senator Lindsey Graham have been subpoenaed by the Georgia criminal investigation, the grand jury probing Trump's election interference. Also subpoenaed, the coup mastermind, John Eastman, the Trump campaign lawyer, Jenna Ellis. The jury believes Giuliani, quote, possesses unique knowledge concerning communications between himself, former President Trump, and the Trump campaign. The January 6th committee also hammering Trump's pressure on Georgia Secretary of State to find 11,780 votes. A criminal probe witness who testified to the grand jury will join us here on The Beat exclusively. The January 6th committee eyeing the role extremist groups played in the insurrection. The next public hearing will focus on ties between these groups and Trump world. Roger Stone was spotted with Proud Boys on January 6th outside the Rattled Hotel, the so-called Legion of Doom insurrection headquarters. And the star witness revealed Mark Meadows wanted to go as well.
Is it your understanding that Mr. Giuliani, Mr. Eastman, and others had set up what has been called, quote, a war room at the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
I was aware of that the night of the 5th.
And do you know if Mr. Meadows ever intended to go to the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
Mr. Meadows had a conversation with me where he wanted me to work with Secret Service on a movement from the White House to the Willard Hotel so he could attend the meeting or meetings with Mr. Giuliani and his associates in the war room.
Now more witnesses are coming forward to the panel and teasing more explosive evidence is to come.
This happens every day. Every day we get new people that come forward and say, hey, I didn't think maybe this piece of a story that I knew was important, but now that you guys are, like, I do see this plays in here.
Will we hear from witnesses that you did not know about, with stories you did not hear because of the hearing so far?
Yes, yes. There will be way more information, and stay tuned.
I know sometimes you hear Trump is rattled, but seriously, he's rattled. This is how we know. Trump is eyeing an early presidential run announcement, quote, designed in part to shield the former president from a stream of damaging revelations. That would mean he can't use $100 million in PAC money for whatever he wants. The clear sign here is he's worried about prosecution. Conservative lawyers say he'll be indicted. And now, if he announces a run early, he can say the prosecution is political. Mayor Garland, the ball will be in your court. Hope you can shoot. Joining me now is Howard Dean, former DNC chair and governor of Vermont, and Dania Perry, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York and former deputy attorney general for the state of New York. Dania, I'll start with you. I'm fascinated by what we're seeing happening down in Georgia right now. I want to jump to the end of this because, again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. But it seems to me that if the president and his friends and his buddies and members of his campaign are going down to a state, asking for votes, asking for additional information, putting pressure on people, that does seem to be some sort of election interference. What would be the legal consequences if the former president, was found guilty of federal election interference in the state of Georgia?
So it would be the DA in Fulton County, Fani Willis, is investigating state law violations of election interference and interference with official proceedings. So that is distinct from potential federal charges. And clearly antennas have gone up of law enforcement, state, local, and federal levels. Her investigation, again, is different, separate, and apart from any investigation that the Department of Justice may or may not be conducting. We hear rumors and rumbles, but the DA there doesn't have the same kind of political and prudential considerations that AG Merrick Garland certainly does. And so she's a little more free from any of this politicization that we do see the Department of Justice concerning itself with. You know, there, of course, Garland has famously expressed, and we also, you know, just see from observing that he is trying to depoliticize this, trying to not to look at this through a political lens. Of course, you know, you can bend over backwards so far that you do a complete flip and it becomes political to not investigate or not prosecute. But Fani Willis does not have those same concerns. And so she seems to be looking at this very seriously, certainly seems to be keyed in to the witness testimony coming out of the January 6th committee, and is very focused on some of these witnesses who are going to push back, and they're gonna scream and yell about attorney-client privilege. At the end of the day, I think it's likely that judges will find, in the same way that a federal district court judge did already in California with respect to John Eastman, that the attorney-client privilege does not apply where there is evidence of a fraud. So the crime, fraud, or other crimes. So the crime, fraud exception very well may come into play here and allow the testimony of these witnesses.
Governor Dean, I want to talk about what we're and how we're sort of getting these witnesses and how the public is putting this together. So there are 2 more January 6 hearings. I don't know why there's only 2. I think we should have January 6 hearings all the way up until November. I'm not doing the programming, but we've got at least 2 right now. What do you think the public needs to see in these next 2 hearings? We know the next one's going to be talking about connections to the Proud Boys. What are some things that you definitely think the public needs to hear in these next 2 hearings to absolutely solidify the case, to not just make it clear that the previous president was fomenting a coup, but basically to delegitimize anyone who was remotely connected with him and still wants to defend his big lie?
Well, we're not talking about huge majorities of people who haven't already decided what they think of Donald Trump. The issue and why Georgia is so important from a political point of view, it's a critical swing state, and there's a Senate seat up that could be potentially quite competitive that the Democrats need to win. I think we are going to win it. But I think that big damage has already been done to Trump. I think the most horrifying thing for the American public is the January 6th footage of people assaulting the Capitol and killing and 4 people dying as a result of that, including a police officer. So I think the damage has already been done. Trump will blather on about his guilt in the committee and all that stuff. It's pretty impressive when you see Liz Cheney up there, who's, you know, pretty smart, and she is just laying waste to Trump and his people. So there's 35% or 30% of people who are going to support Trump, even if he is a dictator and an authoritarian. They kind of want an authoritarian government. But I think an enormous amount of damage has been done already in the court of public opinion. I think that's unlikely to change. And I do think some of his people eventually will be convicted. You cannot call the Secretary of State and say, find me 11,700 votes and expect that not to be the subject of a grand jury inquiry and most likely a trial.
Daniel, speaking of Liz Cheney, I want to play some sound from the Congresswoman talking about what they think some of the results are going to be of this January 6th committee once all concluded, and get your thoughts on the other side.
We'll make a decision as a committee about it.
So it's possible there will be a criminal referral, which
yes.
would be effectively the committee saying that he should be prosecuted, and this is the evidence that we've uncovered.
The Justice Department doesn't have to wait for the committee to make a criminal referral. And there could be more than one criminal referral.
So right there, you've got Liz Cheney saying, we may make a criminal referral. How much pressure does that put the Department of Justice under? You mentioned before, look, you know, you can be so non-political that you end up being political. But if we've got newspaper reports and the January 6th committee and everybody coming out of the woodwork saying, well, by the way, Donald Trump, at this point, Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani apparently went to everybody's house begging for votes in the state of Georgia. I mean, they must have just gone door to door in DeKalb. Do you think that direct criminal referrals announced at the end of the January 6th committee will lead to sped up action on the part of DOJ, or are they going to continue on this sort of slow plodding path that we're supposed to trust that they're eventually going to come to a conclusion with before Congress possibly flips?
It's a great question. The Department of Justice typically prides itself on inhabiting a kind of apolitical bubble. In my 11 years at the Department of Justice, we really didn't concern ourselves with what will flow from this. We kind of followed the law, followed the facts, and did what was the right thing. Here, obviously, this is a situation unlike any other. It's what you say in the law is sui generis. It's its own thing. I would like to think that a referral would apply more pressure on the Department of Justice. As Vice Chairwoman Cheney said, the Department of Justice does not need a referral. It can, of course, observe, just as many Americans are observing. They can see in real time what the evidence is and where that points. But I do think a referral, in this case, it's the odd situation where it may actually have the opposite and unintended effect, where it creates more political pressure, which is exactly what A.G. Garland seems not to want. So in a strange way, this might be the rare case where they should come to their own conclusions, listen to the evidence like everyone else is, and draw conclusions that seem on their face, to be impossible not to come away with.
So, Governor Dean, I just want to end with this very quickly. You now have some Republicans, some very quiet, right, the grown-ups in the room, who are saying, hey, look, maybe Donald Trump shouldn't run again. Maybe it's going to be a problem. Maybe, him running with all these sort of allegations and all this violence associated with him, maybe it ends up being damaging for the party. I'm not falling for a banana in the tailpipe again. There have been people complaining about Trump for 5 years and he keeps running. Do you think any of these charges or potential allegations could influence when he's going to decide to make an announcement? Or do you think it's just a done deal that the former president will run again in 2024?
I don't think it's a done deal at all. And I have no idea what his calculation is. But we won in Georgia, particularly in the Senate, because of Donald Trump. Because there were a number of Republican women, moderate Republican women in the suburbs who couldn't stomach voting for this crook and this disgusting person. And they just couldn't. And that's happening all over the country every day, the more of stuff that comes out. So I'm actually hoping that Trump does run. I think Trump's calculation is mixed up with his illness, which is narcissism, acute narcissism. And it's also mixed up with a political calculation that he's not very good at. I mean, there are a lot of younger people in that party that are much scarier. DeSantis, for one, who just today announced he was going to require all students in Florida's colleges to declare their political views. I mean, this guy is a fascist. Trump is too narcissistic and ill to be a successful fascist, even though he has all those instincts. And I think he'll be easier to beat than any of the other potential candidates.
Howard Dean and Danya Perry, thank you so much for starting us off on the beat today.